It's time to update our way too early top 25s following the NBA draft withdrawal deadline. The biggest mover, chomp chomp, baby.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Happy Monday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your host. This is Andy Patton rocking a Colts hat today. Love that. I'm Isaac Schade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making us your first listener watch to get your Monday going the right way. Reminder, you can catch every single episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all you everydayers and all the great members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord who are here with us. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com to receive 50% off your first year. Andy, a note as we get started here. We are recording this episode on Friday heading into the weekend, similar to what we did last week, actually, because my family is out of town all this week. And so we're just trying to get ahead and make sure we got all that content. So any breaking news from over the weekend, we won't have on today or tomorrow's show, but Andy will cover it later in the week. What we're doing today is we're doing our updated way too early top 25s since we just had the NBA draft withdrawal deadline. And that's where we have the biggest point of roster firming up for the major point of the offseason. Now, Andy, it's been a long time, a month and a half, basically, since we did our first version of this. It was the Monday after the championship game back on April 14th. So it's not just the withdrawal deadline. A ton of stuff has changed. So I expect to see some big changes in our rankings. That said, here's where we're headed. Biggest risers, biggest fallers, and then biggest points of differentiation or discrepancy between Andy and I. We'll see who's sitting on the doorstep, knocking on that top 25, waiting to get in. Andy, why don't you kick us off? Who's the biggest riser, at least that we have in common?
Yeah, it's pretty clear. It's Florida. It's the Florida Gators. I had them 14th in that ranking back on April 14th. I now have them third in my rankings. You had them 18th in your original rankings, now have them second. It's pretty clear at this point that Florida's roster is a top 5 roster, top 3 roster, arguably, in all of college basketball. I think for us, at least, I don't want to speak for you, but for me, I didn't expect them to get their entire front court back. I didn't think that Ruben Chinyelu and Alex Condon and Tommy Houck would all be back in the mix to do that and to also get Xavion Lee and Boogie Fland out of the transfer portal. I mean, just what an incredible offseason for Todd Golden and the Gators, coming off of course, that national championship run last year. It's not quite the same as it was when they won back-to-back, a couple decades ago, because they pretty much returned everybody for those teams. Obviously, losing Walter Clayton and Elijah Martin and Will Richard is a tough blow for this team. But to replace those guys, as well as Denzel Aberdeen, who leaves for Kentucky, with a talented backcourt in Boogie Fland from Arkansas, who I think is going to be a really nice fit in Golden's system, and Xavion Lee, who, I think a lot of people didn't see a ton of Xavion Lee. I don't think there's a lot of even diehards who watch a ton of Ivy League basketball for understandable reasons, but Xavion Lee's extraordinary. He's really, really good player, and with the ball in his hands primarily at this for this Florida team, I think he's going to be excellent. I do have slight concerns for Florida about the fact that both these guards are pretty undersized, and they're both kind of on-ball players. And in fact, we've already seen Boogie Fland, his team at Arkansas last year did better after he was hurt because they had too many guys who wanted the ball in their hands. So I think the balance between Lee and Fland is something to keep a close eye on for Florida. But if they find that rhythm, if they figure it out, man, that team is going to be insanely good, especially with the front court that they have.
Andy, I thought Xavion Lee was like 6'4".
Yeah, he's a little bit bigger. You're right. He's a little bit of a bigger guard, but I think Fland's 6'2", right? So there's still
I believe so, yeah.
Fairly small in that backcourt.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think for me, with all of these that we look at, there's we feel good about this. We have questions about that. My questions for Florida are, how do those two guys fit together? Mm-hmm. And then do you deploy? It's great to have that front court all intact. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this last week, but how do you deploy that front court? Are you trying to get 3 of them in with maybe Houck at the 3? I think that is the big question mark is, are you starting your best 5 individual players? Or if that doesn't work, how do you find your best 5, right? Like, and so that's the big question with Florida there. But obviously a massive, it's funny, Xavier Lee committed to Florida 2 days after we did our last way too early top 25. So obviously those 3 bits of news, Condon back and the backcourt guys coming in, are massive. Andy, some other big risers for us as we look at this here. Another one that we both have is Illinois, who you took from unranked up to 20th, whom I took from 25th up to 19th. Andy, what is it for you that gets Brad Underwood's club back in the mix here?
Oh, it's all the Eastern Europeans, right? I mean, it's
all the itches.
All the itches, exactly. No, I mean, honestly, more than anything else, it's Stojakovic. I mean, he's just an incredibly tremendous player, and not only a great player and a great scorer, but a player who I think really fits Brad Underwood's system. And I think that's what is so appealing to me. When I saw Stojakovic, when he entered the transfer portal, and we kind of saw some of the schools that were interested in him, there was a handful that I thought, okay, he'd be a great fit at Gonzaga, he'd be a great fit at so-and-so. But Illinois stood out immediately of like, oh man, he'd be just such an awesome fit there. And then we saw the visit, and it was like, all right, like at that point, I almost felt like he'd be silly to not go to Illinois. It just makes too much sense. And so I think he's going to be awesome there. I think I reasonably wouldn't be surprised if he's top 3 in the Big Ten in points per game, maybe even leads the conference in scoring. I mean, I think Nick Martinelli coming back for Northwestern might challenge that a little bit, but and then you obviously have the Ivasic's, you already had Timoslav coming back for another year. Now you have Zvonimir coming in as well. I just think that this Illinois roster is really tailored towards Brad Underwood's system in a way that I think really excites me. And again, I had them unranked last time, but they were kind of right. They were in the mix for a ranked spot for me, and I bumped them up here into the top 20, just barely. I still have a few questions about their depth, but I really like the fit here with Stojakovic in particular, and I think that this team's going to make some noise.
Andy, another one that we both have is you have NC State going from 25th up to 19th. That's a +6 jump. I have them going from not ranked up to 25th. That's I guess you can't quantify it, Andy, because I had them not ranked, but whatever. Obviously, it's the Will Wade of it all, plus the talent that's coming in. I mean, obviously, and we're actually going to talk about this on tomorrow's show. I guess I should go ahead and preview the Locked On Wolfpack guys are going to join me for a couple segments. The big linchpin of this thing is Darion Williams, but you've been a big Terrence Arsenault fan for a long time. Let me give you some flowers there. They bring in several other pieces that really seem like things are going to go well. Kadir Copeland comes with Coach Wade from McNeese. Obviously, he started in the ACC and comes back to the ACC. Andy, I'm sure there's big names, big ticket guys, but I think Darion Williams is like whoa, this is big for NC State.
Yes, I agree 100%. I'm really pumped about Darion Williams and what he brings to NC State. I'll point out too, because I didn't have it in my notes here, but we both also ranked San Diego State after not having them ranked previously. You bumped them to 23. I bumped them to 21. Few teams were bigger winners this year than San Diego State, especially in the draft, the withdrawal deadline with Miles Byrd coming back. That was huge for the Aztecs. But the fact that Magoon Guath entered the transfer portal and declared for the NBA draft early in the offseason and then changed his mind on both accounts and is returning for the Aztecs. I mean, that's just tremendous for that team. And so I think that the Mountain West is running through San Diego once again. And I wouldn't be surprised if Brian Dutcher's team makes some real noise next year. So another team that I wanted to make sure we mentioned here, because they've had a really, and again, it's the Trilly Donovan phrase of like, sometimes the best gets are the ones you already had. And for San Diego State to get Guath and Bird back in an era where mid-major teams are struggling to do that. I mean, what a win for Coach Dutcher.
Yeah, Andy, that's a great point. We very easily could have had them in our show we did on Friday where we had our biggest winners. And I don't know that was necessarily a miss from us, but I just think to say like that would have made a ton of sense, man. That's a great pull there. And I appreciate, folks, I guess behind the curtain, we should say we don't talk about our rankings before we bring them together because we want to see where we have areas of agreement and disagreement. So, Andy, it's pretty neat that we both had the Aztecs there coming into the era of being ranked.
Well, Isaac, as we all know, it's Newton's 48th law. If something goes up in the rankings, something has to fall in the rankings, right?
Right.
we're going to talk about some of those teams that are falling in the rankings coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Because between dining out, online shopping, and just general entertainment costs, it's kind of easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just another generic budgeting app either. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan out your long-term goals. And for us and our family, especially with a 15-month-old at home, we always want to make sure that we are on the same page when it comes to our finances. And thankfully with Monarch Money, managing your money with your partner is smoother than ever before. You can track shared and personal accounts, set collective goals, and stay on the same page without all the added stress. So folks, take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, Isaac, we talked about the teams rising in our way too early, although not still quite way as too early. Top 25 rankings here as we are now getting into the thick of the offseason here with the NBA withdrawal deadline passing last week. Now we're going to talk about some teams that we both had falling in our rankings. And Isaac, I think we got to start with a team that both of us still regard quite highly. In fact, we had this team ranked exactly 8th in each of our rankings. But prior to that, we had this as a top 5 team, and that would be the Duke Blue Devils. Isaac, what's our situation here with Duke? Why do we both have them falling here a little bit?
Andy, I think it's twofold for me, and I'm curious to talk about it and see if you feel the same. Number one, it is that Newton's 48th principle you just talked about, where
Right.
if something goes up, other things must come down. I think for me, the biggest thing here is it's more about teams that did a lot or maintained or retained a lot that leapt the Blue Devils, where I don't know that I necessarily think any less of Duke than I did when I had them 3rd previously. It's just that I think more of some other teams because they lost to the guys that I thought they were going to lose. Cooper Flagg, Con Knipple, Kaman Malawach. They retained the guys I thought they were going to retain, Isaiah Evans. And then maybe on the Duke personnel side of it, I do believe slightly less, as we've talked about. I think you said this so well a week or two ago in Dame Sarr than I did in Cedric Coward and the senior leadership he would have brought to this team. And so I think it's the combination of those two things, just the slight budge down in what I think about their roster. Not much less, just a little bit less, but it's really, for me, more about other teams leapfrogging the Blue Devils.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at too. I mean, I took Duke from 2nd to 8th. You took them from 3rd to 8th. The difference to me between like 3 and 8 right now is kind of jumbled. It's not a huge difference, but I do think for me, Duke is replacing Cedric Howard with Sarr is not a bad replacement in terms of talent. I mean, I think Dame Sarr is very, very good, but this was already a pretty young team and a pretty inexperienced team. You know, we talked about the 3 freshmen that they're losing, but they're also losing Tyrese Proctor. And I think this is a team that, you know, they have a lot of youth on the roster. They have the Boozers are going to be incoming freshmen. And then you have guys stepping into bigger roles who didn't play all that much in the previous years. And now you have Dame Sarr instead of Coward, a guy who, yes, hadn't done a ton at like high major programs, only played 6 games at Wazoo, which was a big talking point for him, but had spent multiple years playing college basketball. And so the difference between him and Sarr is significant in that area. And so I look at John Shire's team and I see a team that is really, really young and really inexperienced. And the high level outcome for Duke is incredible. I mean, this team could absolutely contend for national championship. They could run the table and be the best team in college basketball from day one. Like I truly believe that is a possibility for them, but I don't think that it is as likely. And I think that their floor without Coward is a little bit lower. And so I'm not quite there with Duke, but again, we both still have them 8th. It's not like this is a team that we're completely fading or anything like that. It's just like there's some other teams that I like their rosters a little bit better.
And I mean, I love your point there, Andy, that they could do it because, for example, the Boozer twins, all they have done is won everywhere they've been in their life. I mean, it's pretty crazy. Andy, before we move on to some others that we kind of share in common, I just want to stay in the ACC really quick. Louisville was one of your bigger fallers from 7 down to 14. Is that basically a similar function to Duke of other teams leapt them, or is it something about what Louisville lost?
Yeah, their front court depth was my biggest issue with them even when I had them 7th. And then the loss of Ali Khalifa, assuming that his waiver does not get approved, or that lawsuits and everything that they're going for don't result in Khalifa being able to play for them. I think that really hurts their already thin front court. I loved the roster overall, though. Isaac McNeely and Ryan Conwell are great additions for this team. I think they're going to be very good. But yeah, I think I was already concerned about their front court, and if Khalifa's not playing, I'm a lot more concerned about their front court, and that was enough for me to give them what ended up being a bigger drop than I thought it would be. But still a team I have in fairly high regard, just a little bit less so now.
Man, that's a great point. I don't think I dropped them enough because of that Khalifa potentiality. Maybe subconsciously, I was just hoping he would get.
Yeah, I mean, still might. You never know.
But I think your movement of them down is more in line with where we're at right now, like a context of what's happening today. And I think that's wise. Okay. A couple of other teams that we were similar on in drops. The biggest one or another big one here is Michigan State, whom I took from 12th down to 20th, tied for my biggest drop, -8. And you took from 16th down to 23rd, a drop of -7. I think tied for your biggest drop as well. Andy, clearly I believe in Michigan. No, I'm just kidding. Neither of us are buying some of the Kool-Aid here with Sparty. Obviously, they've lost some pieces. Is that what does it for you?
Yeah, I think I was kind of, even when I had them ranked initially, I was sort of expecting Jace Richardson was going to go to the draft, but now that that's obviously confirmed, and then they also lose Trey Holloman, and I think the loss of those two players was enough for me to feel like, they're kind of a borderline top 25 team. Like I look at this roster, I'm looking at John Rothstein's projected top or starting lineup for them, and I'm like, I don't love it. Like, Carson Cooper and Jackson Kohler in the front court, fine. Jeremy Fears, I like Fears. Cohen Carr's a super great athlete, but like, I don't feel great about this roster. I think it could be fine. I like Caleb Glenn, an addition from Florida Atlantic that they got in the transfer portal. I think he's a good player. Divine Ugachukwu, who they just landed from Miami, is another player that I like as well. But like, neither of those guys are huge needle movers. It's hard to bet against Coach Izzo. So I still have them in the top 25. I still think they're going to contend in the Big Ten. But I think for me, I had like 4 or 5 Big Ten teams all kind of right around them. So I feel like they're kind of right in the middle of that kind of tier right below Purdue in the Big Ten. But I'm a little bit lower on Michigan State after losing Richardson and Holloman.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think a lot of people are high on their arch rival Michigan because of getting Yaxel Lendeborg back. Yeah. I still have questions about the backcourt, but the front court excites me as it did last year. Andy, a team we're going to talk more about in the next segment, but we need to make sure to mention here is Arizona. And here's why. It's a funny thing because in the next segment, we're going to talk about our biggest discrepancies. Yeah. Andy and I already had a big discrepancy on Arizona. He had them 18th. I had them 7th. We dropped them, though, each a bunch to where it's our biggest discrepancy, one of our biggest discrepancies, but also still our biggest fallers. So Andy drops Arizona 7. I dropped them 8, but we'll talk more about that, Andy. Where I want to wrap this segment is looking at teams that fell from ranked to unranked. And interestingly, we've got a couple blue bloods here. We both had North Carolina previously 21st. We've both dropped them to not ranked. You took Kansas from 13th to not ranked. I took Kansas nearly that. I had the Jayhawks 23rd. I took them down to 24th. I almost had them out, but kept them in. And then the other one that moved from ranked to unranked was I had Creighton and took them from 24th to out. Andy, is the Tar Heels simply a matter of, hey, we feel like they got some good bookends, but they still, as we record this, haven't locked in somebody at the wing to replace Drake Powell?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what it is. I like the addition of Kion Evans. I think he's very good, and I think he's maybe not an addition that's getting as much positive press as he should. I think he's going to be very good for the Tar Heels, and obviously Vesar is a fantastic addition in the front court. But yeah, I'm worried about the wing. I mean, I think it's as simple as that. I'm worried about the wing. I'm worried about the fact that Evans and Trimble is still a bit of a small backcourt for them, and the depth on this team is, we'll see. I like Jonathan Powell coming in as well. But I'm not quite there with the Tar Heels. I think they're going to be a decent team this year. I think there's the possibility that they rise up, but it would have been great if like Jameer Watkins pulled out of the draft and they managed to bring him to Chapel Hill. Then suddenly we're having a much different conversation, but unfortunately that's not the case. We'll see if they can make any other big time additions. But right now I'm a little skeptical of their roster.
Yeah. As we record, Andy, there's been some scuttlebutt behind the scenes about Luka Bogovac maybe coming over from Eastern Europe to joining the Tar Heels at the 3, and that would obviously be a big help there. Andy, anything we need to say on Kansas, or is it just like, here we continue to go with Kansas struggling in the portal?
Yeah, I think I was optimistic that they would make a big move and that their roster would look like a top 15 roster when I had them 13th, and it doesn't. It's really as simple as that. Like they're relying heavily on Marco Jackson, who missed an entire year and wasn't very good before that. I don't think Trey White's really all that great of a player. Obviously, Darren Peterson might be excellent, and he probably will be. And Flory Badunga and Darren Peterson might be enough to keep this team afloat in the Big 12 and kind of hanging on to a top 25 spot. But I just don't like the rest of this roster enough, and think they struck out on some. They needed Darion Williams, they didn't get him, and I think I'm fairly concerned about where this roster is right now.
All right, for the Jayhawks and Tar Heels, it's the race to find a 3, a small forward, and we'll see who can cross that finish line first. Andy, while we've had a good bit of overlap in our movement up and movement down, there's certainly been some dissension amongst the ranks of where we disagree about where teams sit right now. We're going to unpack those coming up in just a second. All right, we're going to take a look now at areas where Andy and I were the furthest apart. I mentioned it in the last segment, so let's go ahead and bring it up now to lead off this one. We were already pretty far apart on Arizona, about 10 or 11 spots, and we both dropped them a good bit, but kind of an equidistant drop, and now we're still 10 spots apart, with you having them just hanging on at 25th, me at 15th. Andy, what is the reason for the Tommy Lloyd plummet?
Yeah, for me, and maybe he'll prove me wrong this year, and I would be happy if he did. I'm a longtime Tommy Lloyd fan, but I don't feel like we've seen him utilize freshmen all that well. And I think like Carter Bryant's probably one of the most notable examples of a guy who's in the draft right now, who's got lottery buzz around him, is almost certainly going to be a first round pick, but who wasn't particularly productive last year. He was efficient and he's got a really smooth shot, but it felt like Arizona didn't really use the freshmen all that much. And this year they're going into a season where they got 2 projected freshmen in the starting lineup, in Koa Pete and Braden Burries, and the rest of their returners. I mean, the rest of their starting lineup is returners and guys who are pretty good. Anthony Del Orso, Toby Awaka at the 5, and Jaden Bradley. But I'm not sure who the dog is on this team. I'm not sure who the go-to, they don't have Caleb Love anymore, and there's some good and bad with that. I mean, the Caleb Love experience was aptly named that because it wasn't always sunshine and roses, but I'm not sure who the go-to guy is for this team. I'm not sure how exactly Tommy's going to implement the 2 freshmen who, by the way, I think are very good. This is not a knock on either Pete or Burries, and then I look at the depth. Obviously, if Krivas is coming off the bench, I think that's really nice for them depth-wise. But I'm not sure I'm in love with the rest of the depth of this team. So I'm a bit skeptical. I know you have them 15th, and John Rossi has them 13th, and most other places have them kind of floating around the top 15. And to me, again, I think at this point the difference between 15 and 25 is kind of marginal. But I'm skeptical that this is the kind of roster that Tommy's going to have success with.
Yeah. And Andy, it's funny, you talk about that usage of freshmen. We've talked about Houston maybe having to rely on them some more than other years. And yet you and I both have them number 1 overall. Yeah. The difference for me, Andy, is that Houston has these 3 critical pieces coming to, Milo Suzanne staying in, Emmanuel Sharp's still there, JoJo Tugler still there. And the what we've seen from those 3 guys and bringing others along with them is kind of, why I am able to differentiate between those 2 and have Houston higher and more belief than I do in Arizona in their usage of those freshmen. Would that be a fair statement for you as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at Houston's projected starting lineup, I mean, the 2 freshman guards, Harwell and Flemings, they're probably not going to start. And I think that's a big difference for me. I do think they're going to start Cenac at the 5, and he's I think, excellent. But yes, there is a little bit of concern with Houston starting a freshman at the center position, but I'm more in line with Houston's depth to kind of mitigate any concerns about the freshman than I am with Arizona's.
That's good. All right, Andy, another one we wanted to talk about was St. John's is interesting because they were one of my biggest risers, moving up from 16th in our former one to 4th now. And what's funny is it's a big discrepancy, but it was a big discrepancy previously. And the reason is you just kind of held steady, moving them one spot up from 11 to 10. I moved them way up, but I should go ahead and say, Andy, we talked about we have some things we feel good about, but also questions. My question is still the point guard situation. I'm still not convinced with Rick Pitino saying like that he's going to use Ian Jackson as his point guard. If it works, it's going to be because of, I'm going to need to see that before I can be like, all right, I'm with you, Rick. Right. Like, and so that for me is the question. And I say that even having moved them, good grief, up to 4th, because I just think there's so much talent and it's Rick Pitino that they're going to figure something out. And that's why I have them where I do.
I love the talent on this roster, but I'm 100% with you in the sense that who's going to pass the dang basketball on this team? Like if Ian Jackson's going to be their starting point guard, which is what Pitino has said, like maybe he sees something that he thinks he can do with Jackson to kind of get him to facilitate that role. But their backup is a guy named Dylan Darling, who came over from Idaho State, who'd previously been at Wazoo. And Dylan Darling is a very, very good scorer, but he's not a great passer. He's not a great facilitator. He was on a roster where he was kind of heads and shoulders the best player on the team. And so he didn't really have to facilitate. He didn't really get the opportunity to do that. And then you have, guys like Sonone and Osiah Sellers who are good players, but they're scorers. They're not passers. Like that's my concern with St. John's. And I have them 10th. And honestly, I could probably be convinced to move them all the way up to like 5. They have depth, which I think is great. I mean, according to Rothstein's projected starting lineup, that would have both Dylan Mitchell and Dylan Darling coming off the bench, along with Ruben Prey and Liatopoulos, who is good. Like they have a lot of depth, but I'm a little concerned about how the pieces are going to fit together. And we had that concern last year, and they were very, very good, but then they bowed out a little early in the tournament. So we'll see kind of what this looks like. To me, it feels like a team that's kind of 5 to 10. I think you could argue them at 5. I think you can argue them at 3, which is where a lot of people have them. But I kind of would just kind of put them on the lower end of the range I feel like they belong in right now.
The 3-point shooting certainly should be better than it was
last
year. That is a feather in the cap.
Yeah.
Andy, another one that we have some disagreement, in fact, 10 spots of disagreement on is UCLA. You brought them, I believe, from unranked up to 17th. I dropped them slightly. I think I had them 4th, and now they're down to 7th. For the McBruins, our guy that we always give shouts to at the end. What allows you to move them from unranked and bump them up 8 spots?
Yeah, I was probably too low on them before. I think it's more just like a course correction. I don't think they made a ton of dramatic movement roster-wise. I think they'd already had Donovan Dent at that time. But my concern with UCLA is the front court. And I think that the fact that there's a lot of top 10 or even top 5 buzz for UCLA right now, I'm not sure. I don't get it because of the front court. Like that's honestly, like Donovan Dent is incredible. He could be Big Ten Player of the Year. He could be an All-American. It would be almost surprising if he wasn't. Like he's that good. And Sky Clark coming off the ball a little bit more, I think is going to be great for them. I like Eric Daly and Tyler Bilodeau, but Xavier Booker has not ever impressed me in his college career. Like he doesn't seem to have a super high motor. And I don't know that I see it if he's their starting 5. Their other addition in the front court was Steven Jamerson from San Diego. He's not that good. Like he's a decent rebounder, but I mean, San Diego has been god awful for a while. And I watched him a lot last year and he's a decent player and he's a decent, like, I think he's capable of being a backup center in the Big Ten. But is he capable of being a backup center in the Big Ten for a team that has top 10 or top 5 aspirations? Like I'm a little bit more skeptical of that. And especially when I'm not a big believer in the starting center in Xavier Booker. So that's more my concern. If they're willing to run a smaller lineup with Bilodeau at the 5, Daly at the 4, and a 3 guard lineup, and they think they can get away with that in certain lineups, maybe that works. Mick Cronin's a great coach. He gets the most out of his players, especially defensively. And I think Donovan Dent's a tremendous addition for them. But I can't buy this front court being good enough for this team to be ranked as highly as a lot of people have them.
Yeah. Andy, this isn't necessarily a discrepancy for us, but one other school I wanted to mention in a similar way was Iowa State, in terms of like a team that I think you had said behind the scenes, somebody that you felt you were maybe a little too low on previously. that you've brought in now. Just want to say that in passing, because in a similar breath there with the Bruins. Andy, quickly, I know we had mentioned earlier, we wanted to name some teams that were kind of on the doorstep that could have been named here. I just had a list of 6 others that didn't quite make the cut for me that I had under consideration. It was UNC and Creighton, whom I just bumped out. But then also Wisconsin, for me, getting Blackwell back is really big. A couple others under consideration, both Texas and Texas A&M. We had A&M as one of our winners at the draft deadline. And then and Ohio State's another one that I'm kind of like, maybe about that I kind of have knocking on the doorstep. Any of those tickle your fancy?
Yes. I think Wisconsin's backcourt is great. And Nick Boyd's a really great addition for them. Andrew Rohde coming in as well. I'm just a hater of the bad WCC teams, but I'm also not a big fan of their Austin Rapp addition. I think if he's a backup for them, great. But if they're starting power forward, I'm not sure I love it for them. He comes over from the University of Portland. But the last team that I want to mention, though, is Miami. And I'm not quite there with Miami. And I think an unproven coach in Jay Lucas, it would be tough for me to have them preseason top 25. But this starting 5 is incredible. Ernest Uday at the 5, Malik Renault at the 4, Shelton Henderson, the Duke decommit that they flipped at the 3, True Washington from New Mexico at the 2, and then Trey Donaldson from Michigan at the 1. Like, I really like that lineup a lot. The depth is a concern, like a fairly significant concern. I'm not sure they really have any depth. If we're being honest, they have 5 really good players, but I'm not there with them, but I'm keeping a close eye on them. Let's put it that way.
I love it, Andy. I think that's a great call. They're definitely, look, I was going to say definitely going to be improved. Well, there's nothing to do but improve, kind of similar to Louisville last year. So, Andy, that's a good word. Get us out of here.
Yeah, folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen, first watch of the day. We always appreciate having you on here, especially as we record this a little bit early here, as we let Isaac and his family go on a fun vacation after this week. But that is going to wrap it up for us today here on the show. Again, Isaac will be back with you all on Tuesday, talking with the NC State host to talk about this fun Will Wade team. And then we'll have another show for you all on Friday as well. And I'll get you 2 more in the middle of the week. But folks, thank you so much. Once again, we always want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. We actually both had Purdue incredibly high, and we never talked about them. So that's a true apology to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes, because we also didn't talk about Kentucky. Cheers to the Mick Bruins. We did talk about them. And until next time, peace out.